People went to sleep protected by modern engineering and drowned in their beds. The rain began at midnight. Water burst through concrete walls designed to last 1,000 years, carrying entire villages downstream in the darkness. In 8 hours, 240,000 people were dead. Air raid sirens wailed warnings, but no one could hear them above the roar of collapsing civilization. Villages vanished. Then came silence. Had humanity's greatest engineering achievement become its most deadly weapon? The Henan province of 1975 was not a backward region waiting for progress. This was the heart of modern China, where Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward had transformed ancient agricultural valleys into showcases of socialist engineering. Banqiao, Shimantan, and dozens of smaller communities thrived in the shadow of massive concrete monuments, dams that stretched across rivers like sleeping giants, their spillways gleaming with Soviet precision. These weren't simple flood barriers. They were symbols of humanity's conquest over nature, proof that communist science could tame the ancient Yellow River system that had flooded these valleys for millennia. The Banqiao Dam rose 24 meters high and stretched nearly 500 meters across the Ru River, concrete fortress designed by the finest Soviet engineers and built by thousands of enthusiastic workers during the 1950s. Local families had watched it grow, stone by stone, convinced they were witnessing the birth of permanent security. Children played in villages that now sat comfortably behind walls of reinforced concrete, their parents farming rice paddies that would never again fear the seasonal floods that had terrorized previous generations. The dam could withstand a 1-in-1,000-year flood event. Science had calculated this with mathematical certainty. But mathematics hadn't accounted for politics, and politics hadn't accounted for Typhoon Nina. The engineers knew the truth, but truth was dangerous in 1975 China. Chen Xing, the chief hydrologist, had spent years warning that the Banqiao Dam's spillway capacity was fatally inadequate. His calculations showed that extreme weather could overwhelm the concrete barriers, turning protective walls into death traps. But Chen Xing's warnings disappeared into bureaucratic files, labeled as counter-revolutionary pessimism, by officials who preferred revolutionary optimism to engineering reality. The dam was a symbol of communist achievement. Symbols didn't fail. Engineers who suggested otherwise were transferred to remote postings or worse. By 1975, Chen Xing had been silenced, his technical reports gathering dust while Typhoon Nina gathered strength over the South China Sea. Typhoon Nina formed in late July 1975, a swirling mass of atmospheric violence that meteorologists tracked with growing concern. But concern wasn't the same as preparation. The storm system carried unprecedented moisture content, what scientists would later classify as a 1-in-2,000-year weather event, precisely the scenario that exceeded every safety calculation built into Henan province's dam network. As Nina moved inland, it encountered a high-pressure system that stalled its forward motion, turning the typhoon into a stationary rainfall generator that dumped months of water in hours. The numbers were staggering. Over 1,000 millimeters of rain fell in less than 24 hours across the dam catchment areas. Rivers that normally carried modest seasonal flows suddenly became torrents carrying the runoff of entire mountain ranges. August 8, 1975, midnight. Most families in Banqiao and surrounding villages had gone to bed listening to heavy rain on their roofs, the same sound that had lulled their ancestors to sleep for centuries. But this rain was different. At the Banqiao Dam, operators watched gauge needles climb past every red line on their monitoring equipment. The reservoir behind the dam was filling faster than the spillways could drain it. Water levels rose 10 meters in 6 hours, an impossibility that was becoming reality in real time. Radio operators tried desperately to contact provincial authorities, but communication lines were failing under the storm's assault. By 1 a.m., water was flowing over the dam's crest, something the designers had claimed could never happen. The concrete began to crack at 1:30 a.m. Not the hairline fractures that engineers expected in minor floods, but massive structural failures that sounded like gunshots echoing across the valley. Water found every weakness, every joint where revolutionary enthusiasm had replaced engineering precision during construction. The pressure was astronomical, millions of tons of water pushing against barriers designed for thousands. At exactly 1:45 a.m., the Banqiao Dam failed catastrophically. A wall of water 20 meters high roared downstream at 50 kilometers per hour, carrying everything in its path. Entire villages vanished in seconds. Families died in their beds before they could wake. The water moved faster than screams. But Banqiao was just the beginning. The flood wave from the primary dam failure slammed into the Shimantan Dam 30 kilometers downstream, overwhelming its spillways and triggering a second catastrophic failure within hours. Then came the cascade effect that engineers had their eyes but never witnessed, 62 dams throughout the river system failing in sequence as each structure was overwhelmed by water from the dam above it. The Henan Province Dam Network, designed as an integrated flood protection system, became a series of weapons firing in sequence. Each dam failure released enough water to destroy the next dam downstream, creating a domino effect of destruction that swept across hundreds of square kilometers. The human cost was beyond comprehension. Entire extended families disappeared together when walls of water struck their villages. Survivors described watching their neighbors' houses dissolve like paper as floods carrying trees, livestock, and debris tore through communities that had existed for centuries. One survivor later recalled seeing a man swept past her window, clutching a baby, both disappearing into darkness that swallowed their screams. Bodies were found weeks later, lodged in trees 15 meters above normal ground level, testament to the height of water that had swept through valleys. But the immediate drowning was only the beginning. Disease spread through contaminated water supplies. Crops were destroyed, triggering starvation. Transportation infrastructure collapsed, preventing rescue operations from reaching devastated areas. When dawn broke on August 9, the landscape had been rewritten. Where thriving agricultural communities had existed 12 hours earlier, vast lakes now covered the valley floors, their surfaces broken by rooftops and treetops that marked the graves of buried villages. Rescue workers arriving from unaffected areas found scenes that defied description: trains thrown from their tracks and wrapped around hillsides, factories relocated several kilometers from their foundations, entire sections of highway pavement peeled up and deposited in farmers' fields. The official death toll would never be released. Conservative estimates suggested 240,000 people died in the first week, but millions more faced starvation and disease in the aftermath. Some researchers believe the true death toll exceeded 300,000, making it history's deadliest dam failure by an enormous margin. The cover-up began immediately. Communist Party officials declared the disaster a state secret, forbidding journalists from entering the affected areas and ordering local survivors to never discuss what they had witnessed. Foreign aid was rejected to maintain the illusion that socialist engineering didn't fail catastrophically. Bodies were buried in mass graves without ceremony or record keeping. Families searching for missing relatives were told their loved ones had been relocated for agricultural work in distant provinces. The Banqiao Dam disaster simply vanished from official Chinese history, as if 240,000 people had never existed. For 20 years, the world's deadliest engineering failure remained hidden behind political propaganda and bureaucratic silence. But concrete doesn't lie, and neither do survivors. When China finally began acknowledging the 1975 floods in the 1990s, the revelations shocked the international engineering community. Here was proof that modern infrastructure could fail as catastrophically as any ancient levee, that political pressure could override safety calculations with lethal consequences, that cover-ups could hide disasters of massive scope for decades. The engineering principles that failed in Henan province in 1975 haven't changed. Extreme weather events still overwhelm spillway capacity. Political pressure still silences engineers who raise safety concerns. Governments still classify infrastructure failures to avoid accountability. For decades, the Banqiao Dam collapse was treated as an impossible tragedy buried in Chinese archives. But aging infrastructure, extreme weather, and political interference with safety warnings, does that really sound like ancient history? Modern dams worldwide face similar pressures from climate change, precipitation patterns that exceed their design parameters. Engineers in many countries report political pressure to downplay infrastructure risks that might threaten economic development. The same deadly combination of engineering overconfidence and political suppression that killed 240,000 people in Henan province operates today across the globe. The technology has improved, but human nature remains unchanged. The Banqiao Dam disaster was the deadliest infrastructure failure in human history, claiming more lives than most wars and natural disasters combined. And until the 1990s, most of the world had never heard its name. History doesn't just bury bodies, it buries warnings. But some failures are too important to forget. Not as statistics, but as reminders that concrete and politics make deadly partners. The people who survived that night weren't the ones who trusted modern engineering most. They were the ones who happened to live on higher ground. Pause, they went to sleep believing in permanent protection. They never woke up.